And now it is time for more Velikovsky. Are you ready to have your face melted off by the insanity of what you're about to hear? Yes, it is time. It is time for the pain. Let's get back into Worlds in Collision by Immanuel Velikovsky. And remember, we are reading a chunk of the Venus section. And then we are, or not we, me, there's no one else with me. Why do I keep saying we? I will continue to comment on the stuff as we go through Velikovsky and bring up new sciences and new stuff that we have learned as a community that either fills in gaps of what Velikovsky missed or absolutely proves all of the stuff that Velikovsky is talking about here. Now, don't forget, this book was written in the 50s, and to me, that's impressive, because what that shows you is that humans, people even back then were already on the right track. It's just the mainstream were completely against them. Velikovsky got absolutely railroaded. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion. But it's important to think about that as you look back and read old stuff. Don't discard all of that old stuff, because Velikovsky, he makes all kinds of scientific predictions that literally were proven true over the course of the decades in his life and afterwards. And that's exactly what we want from a scientific perspective. Alright, so at this point in time, we have Venus and Earth interacting. Venus is in hardcore Comet mode right now. Venus and Earth, their electromagnetic spheres of influence are touching one another. They are not touching physically, by the way. So one of the things I want to make sure that everybody understands is that the Earth and Venus are not touching. They're not bouncing off each other. There's nothing weird like that going on. I know that there are other theories that they make it sound like planetoids smashed into Earth while humans were sitting there, and I think that's even one of the theories on how the moon was created by Chan Thomas. I think he's the guy. Be careful with that stuff, and Velikovsky is not roped into that, alright? Velikovsky, he stays very scientific. He reads the history, and he says, this is what I think happened, here's the proof for it, and here's my predictions. So that's good stuff. Anyway, so when he says worlds in collision, we're not colliding. Okay, you get all that. You're not dumb. So at this point in time, we have the two planets. They're fighting each other. They're battling it out. We have hurricanes going on. We have earthquakes going on. We have 13-mile-high mountains of water rolling across the planet. And if that is not enough craziness for you, we have all of our ancient ancestors, the ones who survived and could tell the story. They all recount continents either falling into the ocean or rising from the ocean. Now, I was thinking about this, this is one of the reasons why I now actually take the Atlantis hypothesis semi-serious. Or not semi, I take it seriously now. Because if our ancestors say that continents were lost, like this is how you lose them. One of the problems is, how do you lose a continent, right? Where do you get how does that even happen? Like if we just follow mainstream garbage, we will never really come to a good conclusion on how you can truly lose a continent, right? But if you have two planets interacting with each other the way these two are interacting, you essentially have two bodies just twisting the crap out of each other while they're operating under electrical properties. And this is completely possible. So all of a sudden, you don't need plate tectonics. You don't need any of that trash. You just need science, electricity, and torsion. And that torsion is a big part of all this. But could you imagine? Okay, so imagine yourself right now. You're just sitting there wherever you are or walking around, and all of a sudden, wherever you're at, your entire landmass around you just starts dropping. You can feel, your stomach flips, the air starts rushing by you, and suddenly the entire landmass that around you, your surroundings, just starts sinking and going down. And depending on your elevation, eventually you start to see water rushing in from the oceans. And there's nothing stopping the land that you're on from going down. It's just going down, right? So that's kind of what probably may have happened to Atlantis, for example. They dropped, 10,000+ feet under the water. Could you imagine that, just chilling? Already dealing with all the craziness going on, the hurricanes and the earthquakes and the electrical storms, and then all of a sudden your continent just goes down. I mean, the subduction zone on that would be insane. Anyway, that stuff just trips me out. All right, but that's not what this chapter is talking about at all. So great, I just wasted all of our time. This chapter is going to deal with the mountains of water that were heaped up by the interaction of Venus and Earth with one another. Now, the reason scientifically why this can happen is because the water would be charged to a certain potential, and that potential would be drawn towards Venus as the opposite charge, right? Once again, it's like if you rub a balloon on your arm, you could have the hair follow that balloon without actually touching the balloon to the hair, right? Same thing with the water on Earth. Remember, the water of Earth is not attached to the planet. It's the only thing, it's one of the main things that's not attached, right? So the land on Earth is shaking and twisting and torsioning, and it's having all kinds of problems, right? It's grinding together and doing that stuff, but it's not like overflowing on itself. Well, I take it back. It sort of is in certain areas. But the water on Earth, I mean, that's just a free agent. I mean, there's nothing stopping the water. The water just flows. So, for example, if you were to stop the rotation of Earth, the water is just going to keep going, right? It has that inertia. It's not going to stop with the planet. Well, that's what happens here, right? So Venus grabs onto the water and it attracts it and it just builds it up. One of the interesting things about the mountains of water stories is there's an American Indian story to where they actually have people riding out, like running as fast as they can to try to get away from that mountain of water rolling over the North American continent. Now, I say riding, I realize there's a section of history that is confused on whether or not North America had horses at the time. That's not a discussion from here, but there's plenty of evidence that shows that horses existed in the North American and South American area. We'll talk about that in a completely different show. Anyway, the story goes that these particular tribes, some of the people, they were able to literally get away from the mountain of water that was rolling towards them. What that tells us is that it is not a typical tsunami, right? You're not going to outride your general tsunami. Tsunami is going to rush in and it takes people out. You're not outriding that tsunami. You're not outrunning a tsunami. But these people could do that. Why? Because the water's speed is attached to how fast Venus is passing by Earth. And it's going pretty slow, relatively speaking. So, for example, if you were to look at the moon right now, if you ever just stare at the moon and try to watch it go across the sky, it gets pretty boring because the moon doesn't, I mean, it moves, but it doesn't. It's like, come on, move. It's like, But then you have, so Venus is basically doing what the moon's doing, right? It's not screaming by Earth at bajillion miles an hour. It's doing it's going through its path, and it takes time. These are huge bodies. They only have so much momentum. Anyway, so the water is only traveling so quick, so these people are able to stay ahead of the mountain of water to some degree. Some people. Most people don't. Most people get taken out by this thing. But it's just interesting that there are American Indian stories about that. There are also a lot of other stories about these mountains of water, and that's what Velikovsky is going to go into. And then it's also going to get into the science of what happened to these mountains of water and the repercussions on Earth. So here we go. This section of Worlds in Collision is titled The Spark. A phenomenon of great significance took place. The head of the comet did not crash into the Earth, but exchanged major electrical discharges with it. A tremendous spark sprang forth at the moment of the nearest approach of the comet, when the waters were heaped at their highest above the surface of the Earth, and before they fell down, followed by a rain of debris torn from the very body of the comet. Now, Velikovsky is going to channel a lot of Abrahamic religion stuff here, but he also talks about other stuff. So bear with me, especially, I know you atheists out there can get a little antsy. Just listen to it and try to think about it from a different perspective. Don't forget, as far as critical thinking capabilities are concerned, you have to practice this kind of thing. You have to be able to look at evidence from other perspectives, even if it's something that offends you on a level that just makes your butt twitch or something, all right? So just bear with me, listen to what he has to say, and try to take it, neutrally, and then go from there. All right, let's go back.
And the angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them. And the pillar of the cloud went before their face, and stood behind them. And it was a cloud and darkness, but it gave light by
An exceedingly strong wind and lightnings rent the cloud. In the morning, the waters rose as a wall and moved away. Now, what Velikovsky is talking about right here, like, what is all this, right? Like, what is that quote? What are you talking about? This pillar of the cloud and all of this? So, what's going on here is that these people were seeing the tail of the comet. So, what the tail of the comet literally looked like to them from their perspective was a giant pillar of smoke. So basically, Venus is so close that we're so close to the tail of the comet that we just see this huge black mass of smoke just billowing off of Venus, right? And it's not hitting Earth yet in this particular point in time, but it's, Earth is coming up towards it. But that's what you would see if you are coming up close to a comet, right? Of that size especially. Venus may as well be on fire at this point. It's not, but that's what it's like. So just imagine a huge smoking ball and Earth is catching up to it. So that tail literally just looks like a column, like it's just a giant pillar right in front of them. And at nighttime, what they can see like all the burning and the electricity and all of that stuff in the dark. And then by day, it's just one hell of a dark ass cloud, column up in front of them. So that's what these guys are seeing. So if you ever wondered what the hell are they talking about when people, and it's not just the Abrahamic religions, don't forget. All kinds of ancient histories talk about this exact same event because they all saw this tail. They all saw this huge column of smoke, and it was not from a volcano. Get rid of that crap. There are volcanoes going on, don't get me wrong, but that is not what they're talking about. They're talking about the tail billowing off of Venus. And then, of course, they wake up to watching the oceans or the sea or whatever body they were next to. Suddenly, those waters are being lifted up and away. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground. And the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued. And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels. And the waters returned, and covered the chariots and the horsemen, and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. The immense tides were caused by the presence of a celestial body close by. They fell when a discharge occurred between the earth and the other body. Artapanus, the author of the no longer extant De Judaeus, apparently knew that the words, "The Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud," refer to a great lightning. Eusebius quotes Artapanus, "But when the Egyptians were pursuing them, a fire, it is said, shone upon them from the front, and the sea overflowed the path again, and the Egyptians were all destroyed by the fire and the flood." The great discharges of interplanetary force are commemorated in the traditions, legends, and mythology of all the peoples of the world. The god Zeus of the Greeks, Odin of the Icelanders, Ukko of the Finns, Perun of the Russian pagans, Wotan of the Germans, Mazda of the Persians, Marduk of the Babylonians, Shiva of the Hindus, is pictured with lightning in his hand and described as the god who threw his thunderbolt at the world overwhelmed with water and fire. Now this is amazing. So, all cultures, for some weird reason, have all of these gods throwing lightning bolts, right? Or not all of these gods. They have, like, a god throwing lightning. This is spread all over the place. There's no mystery here. We all know that. But the mainstream always attributes this kind of an act to thunderstorms, right? Because all of our ancestors were monkeys, right? They're just scratching themselves, banging their heads against the wall, and worshiping, random storms, right? Our ancestors couldn't stop for 2 seconds and try to think about what was going on, apparently. But this puts the entire situation into a completely different frame of mind, right? Because now the thing that's throwing thunder makes sense. Remember, once again, I said this in a show or two ago before, if you exchange the term God with planet, mythologies suddenly make a ton more sense. Same thing right here. I mean, that's what Velikovsky is talking about. So here we have a huge thunderbolt passing between Earth and Venus. Don't forget, these two bodies are electrically charged and they're attracted to one another right now. So at this point, we have to think that they are of opposite charges, right? But as they're starting to get closer and closer, you're going to have more electrical buildup. And these two planets are going to want to try to figure out a way to do, what does electricity always try to do? It always tries to find a way to neutral ground. These two planetary bodies eventually will have to neutralize each other. This spark is the sign of the neutralization of the two bodies neutralizing the charge towards one another. This is why they do not collide. Now, I make that sound simple. There is way more going on. If we factor in Birkeland currents and all the other electrical charge stuff that is taking place in this kind of an event, then we start to really paint the true scientific picture. So for those of you who are out there who are know about some of this stuff and are operating on a higher level, yeah, I get it. So I'm not trying to say that didn't happen. There's a lot more going on for all of you guys who are new to this, but this is the beginning. At least this sets the stage for you. Alright, Velikovsky continues. Similarly, many psalms of the scriptures commemorate the great discharges. Then the earth shook and trembled. The foundation also of the hills moved and were shaken. He bowed the heavens also and came down. He did fly upon the wings of the wind. At the brightness that was before him, his thick clouds passed, hailstones and coals of fire. The Lord also thundered in the heavens, and the highest gave his voice, hailstones and coals of fire, and he shot out lightnings. Then the channels of waters were seen, and the foundations of the world were discovered. This is amazing. So what that is saying right there is that as the water gets pulled away, I mean, people are literally looking at, they're looking at the subduction zone, right? It's kind of the same idea with a tsunami. So when the tsunami comes in, the first thing that happens is there's a huge subduction of water away from the shore. So just think about a subduction zone, but multiply it by like 1 billion. Could you imagine that? These people are literally seeing the entire shelf of the ocean right in front of them. That must have been one hell of a sight, dude, to watch all of that water get pulled away, bunched up into the sky. And then you could just see, you have like basically all kinds of new land right in front of you, right? The floor of the ocean. Now, one of my questions I have with respect to this kind of a story, for example, the story where they talk about the Red Sea parting or whatever, the people are supposed to be able to walk on this new ground that is exposed from the waters parting. Here's my problem, or my question. If the waters are parted, that's fine. I'm on board with that. That makes scientific sense. But how are these people traversing the ground? Because the ground must have been sloshy, muddy. There would have been a ton of obstacles, you would think, in your way, right? So it makes me wonder how long the seas were parted. They don't really make it sound like it's too long, I don't think. But damn, could you imagine walking across like an entire sea while the water's on either side of you? So this makes me wonder if these guys, they saw the waters part, but it wasn't like they understood it was the sea parted or some huge body parted, but they only went through like a small portion of it. I don't think we should take these recountings in the sense of they crossed, say, how big is the Red Sea? It's 174 miles long. But it's only 18 miles wide. Right now, that's the current Red Sea. So, I guess you could cover that in one day. The bottom, let's say they crossed the width of it. Yeah, all right, but then you still have to contend with all the obstacles down there. So I'm curious, how did this look to them? Like, what kind of terrain did they have to deal with? The reason why this is important is because while we're discussing the Abrahamic literature right here, there are other cultures that also have this exact same story. Right? There's an American Indian tribe that literally has the story that 12 different routes were opened in the middle of the ocean, and that's how their ancestors got away from the people that were pursuing them. Anyway, it's just fascinating to hear this. So my question then becomes that nobody seems to talk about how do you traverse? What's it like traversing the bottom of a parted sea? Like, how messed up is that? Or here's my other question. Is the pulling apart of the water so complete because you're dealing with electromagnetism? Does it actually pull the water down to even the smallest level to where you almost maybe even have a semi-dry bed to walk across? Because since all the water is attracted. This is just a question. I don't know. It's just something that when I see this stuff and attempt to put it into a very realistic sense, right? I mean, they were going to have to deal with the topography of the ocean or the seafloor, right? Just because you pull the waters apart, I mean, you have to deal with that. And nobody talks about dealing with the crappy terrain, So I wonder if all that water, I mean, did it really rip out a certain amount of moisture to a certain level to where it could have been fairly dry? I don't know. Just thinking out loud. All right, I've gone long enough. Let's get back. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord breaketh the cedars. The voice of the Lord divideth the flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shaketh the wilderness. The Lord shaketh the wilderness of Kadesh. The kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice. The earth melted. The waters saw thee. They were afraid. The depths also were troubled. The skies sent out a sound. Thine arrows also went abroad. The voice of thy thunder was in the heaven. The lightnings lightened the universe. The earth trembled and shook. Clouds and darkness are round about him, and a fire groweth before him, and burneth up his enemies about. His lightnings enlightened the world. The earth saw and trembled. I love this stuff now because what they're they're just describing what they are dealing with and seeing in the sky, right? They're describing the flames of fire. They're describing the shaking of the entire planet. They're describing the smoke that they're seeing. And they're even saying, hey, look, in certain areas, the earth is literally turning to molten lava. The earth is melting. And that would have happened, right? When you have torsion going on around, that's, not necessarily for this section, but there are literally entire areas of this planet. North America is one of them, has a huge, like 1,000-foot lava flow that's very, very recent. The geologists hate. They try to cope with that. But that's what would happen, right? So they're seeing this and they're describing it right here in the religious texts. And for the most part, pretty much everybody just discards what our ancestors had originally written. It's unbelievable. The evidence is right here. Even more interesting, this is what I always find fascinating. All of our ancestors not only describe what's going on around us, they describe what they hear. Now that's important because if all of this is just made up garbage, they did not have to go through and include what they heard. And they talk about what they hear, right? The planet Venus is so close, they hear it roaring by the planet Earth. I can't even imagine what kind of situation that would be to be able to hear. Not only are these people seeing this insane thing going on in the sky, but they hear it too. They hear the planet roaring by them. And it's even more interesting because then in other sections and in other areas, and once again, this goes for all ancient cultures that survive, they even talk about being able to smell the planet. That's just amazing. Why, if this was all made up, why go through all this trouble? How do you correlate? You just don't, people like that back in the day would not have been able to make all this stuff up. They must have gone through something. All right, let's continue. Nothing is easier than to add to the number of such quotations from other parts of the scriptures: Job, the Song of Deborah, the prophets. With the fall of the double wall of water, the Egyptian host was swept away. The force of the impact threw the Pharaoh's army into the air. Come and see the works of God. He is terrible in his doing toward the children of men. He turned the sea into dry land. They went through the flood on foot. Thou hast caused men to ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water. So, I mean, he even says that they dried the land. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, he does say he turned the sea into dry land. I wonder if that's literal. I actually do wonder, did it literally dry up? I don't know. Anyway, this tossing of the Egyptian host into the air by an avalanche of water is referred to also in the Egyptian source I quoted before. On the shrine found in El Arish, the story is told of a hurricane and of a prolonged darkness when nobody could leave the palace, and of the pursuit by the pharaoh Tautom of the fleeing slaves whom he followed to Pekorati, which is the biblical Pi-ha Kirath. His majesty leapt into the place of the whirlpool. Then it is said that he was lifted by a great force. Although the larger part of the Israelite fugitives were already out of reach of the falling tidal waves, a great number of them perished in this disaster, as in the previous ones of fire and hurricane of cinders. That Israelites perished at the Sea of Passage is implied in Psalm 68, where a mention is made of my people that remained in the depths of the sea. These tidal waves also overwhelmed entire tribes who inhabited Tehama, the 1,000-mile-long coast region of the Red Sea. God sent against the Johormites swift clouds, ants, and other signs of his rage, and many of them perished. In the land of Johanna, an impetuous torrent carried off all of them in a night. The scene of this catastrophe is known by the name of Idam, or Fury. The author of this passage, Masudi, an Arab author of the 10th century, quotes an earlier author, Umayyah, son of Abu Salt. In days of yore, the Johormites settled in Tehama, and a violent flood carried them all away. Likewise, the tradition related in Kitab al-Guwana is familiar with the plague of insects, ants of the smallest variety, that forced the tribe to migrate from Hejaz to their native land, where they were destroyed by Typhoon, a deluge. In my reconstruction of ancient history, I endeavor to establish the synchronism of these events in the Exodus. Now that ends this section. So much going on in so little text, it's amazing. So I'll start calling it and wrapping it up here. I've already talked enough. But basically what we have water being carried away electrically by Venus. Then once the two planets neutralize each other, we have the oceans crashing in back on one another. So if you've ever wondered how the heck the Red Sea thing could have ever happened, or if you've ever, studied other histories who have the same general story, how do you reconcile this? Like, how do you bring that to reality? Here you go. We now have the science and the eyewitness testimony to prove that something like parting the Red Sea is completely possible.